Gosh, it takes a while.
Mm.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to a Hard Talk session. We're going to talk politics today, the politics of nursing, and we've got a wonderful lineup of speakers. And in some ways, this is a sort of old gangs reunion here. Well, maybe not so old. Jane and myself and Anne-Marie, we've known each other for many years. We've always been involved to some extent in the politics of nursing in different ways, and still are. So, you know, it's wonderful to be on the same platform with you, my buds from old but days gone by, and I know we're going to have a really interesting discussion. And Ying, it's fabulous to have you here. I'm so glad that you could join us. You're a new friend from the RCN, and we're delighted that you're going to bring a perspective from the Royal College of Nursing in London. So I'm going to ask Jane to start us off. Jane, if you would do that, please. Jane wrote a book a few years ago called The Politics of Nursing, which for me was absolutely seminal in sort of making me woke, Jane, even all that long time ago. And Jane is still a great collaborator. So Jane's going to give us a kind of scene setting on where we are and how we got there. So Jane, over to you. Can I just ask if you're not speaking to put your mics on mute? We had somebody who was mending the ceiling in the last one and it was a bit diverting.
Okay, so I'm trying to get my slides up now. Not quite sure why they're not appearing on the screen. Sorry, folks,
Nick, any ideas?
Share screen is what I meant to click, isn't it?
Yes, and it worked, didn't it?
Yep.
It did work. Two options, share a screen or share a file.
Share screen.
Share screen. Allow. Oh, it's woken up. I think maybe something's happening now. Yes.
There we go.
It says happy sharing. Okay, now what?
So if Jane, if you get your presentation and put it onto present mode, like full screen mode, and then.
Okay. You got me now?
Yep. There we go.
Yep, you're up.
Okay, folks. Bar, give me. I know I've got 10 minutes, and I always talk too much, so I'm looking to you to interrupt when my time is up or when I get boring. Hello, everyone. Fantastic to be on this call. Thank you so much to Nursing Now for inviting me. I'm talking to you from my unusually swelteringly hot office in my garden in the south of England. I've got a little fan on to stop me expiring before the end of the talk, but I know that probably many of you beaming in are in much hotter and noisier environments than I am. So anyway, off we go. So I'm going to talk about the politics of nursing. That's who I am. And if you want to know more about me, you can go to my website. The address is there. I am British, and I'm going to tell you a bit about my story from my local engagement with nursing when I started my training in London many, many years ago, panning through to my current roles in global nursing, particularly working with the International Council of Nurses running the Global Nursing Leadership Institute. So what I'm going to briefly touch on is the public image of nursing, the politics of nursing, issues around gender, race, class, and so on, the need to tell new stories of nursing, and finish with a few propositions really about what we can do, which I think will be part of the major discussion. So these are my key points today. So I wonder if you can spot me in these pictures. My favorite one is the mug shots of my nursing group at the London hospital. I am top left. That hair, well, it's my own hair, but it was actually a curly perm, which was very fashionable at the time. And you will see the wonderful Victorian chambermaid outfits that we're all wearing in our set. And you'll notice that we're all white British women, no men in our group at that point. We were all graduates doing a fast stream nursing course. And some other pictures, me with my fellow previous editors of Nursing Times magazine, and me with some of my students at the University of Kingston. That's Kingston, UK, not Kingston, Jamaica, although I'm open to offers. My career gradually expanded into more policy related roles. So the top right picture here, and you'll see Anne-Marie, one of our speakers later, in the picture of us at the Houses of Parliament in London, where we were working on the Prime Minister's Commission on the Future of Nursing and Midwifery, chaired by Anne Keane in the centre there, who was a Member of Parliament, nurse and health minister. On the left, you'll see me with my Kurdish colleague, because I work on many projects, but one of them I support long term is the College of Nursing in North Iraq, which is a war zone, a very difficult area. So just a reminder of the incredible challenges under which many of our colleagues are working. And bottom right, there I am talking in the US when I was doing a visit to Barbara's former workplace in North Carolina, just before the global launch of Nursing Now. So I feel I've been sort of traveling along with the campaign for a while. What I want to talk about particularly is this public image of nursing, because when I went into nursing as a student nurse, I thought I was joining an honourable profession, respected and so on, but I hadn't really ever taken full notice of the way that nurses were portrayed in the media, in films, on greetings cards, in all sorts of ways. And as I started looking at these images, I found them rather disturbing, really. They are, of course, in this presentation mainly UK based, because it was I'm drawn on my old library from the time when I was doing this work in the UK, but I'll move sort of more globally afterwards. So we all know this image. This is perhaps the public image of nursing. It's Florence Nightingale, as she never was, carrying the lamp that didn't look like that in the wards at Scutari. So this ministering angel image is the archetypal one. And I was amazed when I came to work globally that how well known Florence is in so many different places. I got a Florence Nightingale medal in Uzbekistan, for example. And in Mongolia, they proudly showed me their little statuette of Florence Nightingale. Nightingale did not like this image. She thought it was very sentimental, but she understood the value of it in marketing the ways in which she was trying to reform nursing. This is an advert from a recruitment advert from the US in the First World War, the greatest mother in the world. There are occasionally men in these images of nursing. I love these four. They're not a barbershop quartet or waiting to do the waiting tables. They are nursing students, the class of 1924 at Penn in the United States. I wonder if they were all doing mental health nursing, which is often where men worked. Through to a very popular series of films in the UK, the Carry On films. One of them was called Carry On Nurse in the, I guess it was in the 60s and 70s. And this has all the nursing stereotypes in one picture. You've got the patient who's misbehaving rather. You've got matron in the middle who is a fearsome old battle axe and keeps all the patients in order and wears an extremely strange hat. On her left, you've got the young sort of sexy nurse. And on the right, you've got someone who's sort of probably transitioning from sexy nurse to battle axe. So these are, when I came to study these images more closely, I realized from the feminist literature that these stereotypes or archetypes of women, the ways of portraying women as angels, as sex pots or worse, and as battle axes or old crones, mapped perfectly onto the nursing images. So they are the way that women are generally portrayed. So here's another sexy nurse in black stockings. You wouldn't get away with doing a shift in those shoes. Images still very prevalent. This is a picture I took when I was in Beijing a few years ago, sexy nurse. And this is from a TV soap opera in the UK that was extremely popular. This is the doctor-nurse relationship, not equals, but the nurse waiting patiently for the doctor to scratch his head and then give her the orders. Of course, we shoot ourselves in the foot in the profession. This was an advert, a recruitment advert from our own Department of Health. Send us the coupon, post to the chief nursing officer. And this was all about how you don't really, what you need to be a nurse is a nice, kind person. Not about the education, the professionalism, and so on. So it's appealing to a very different sort of mindset. Doctor-nurse romances, the staple of many patients' reading when I was nursing clinically. The idea is always in the end that the doctor and the nurse get together and they get married, and then in many places the nurses then retires from service. In fact, they had to in many places in the past. So these are old stories of nursing, but they're still recycled. And I found a very interesting, very recent example, the Angels of Lovely Lane. They're wearing the sort of kit that I used to wear. It's been reduced from $7.99 to $4.99, and it's written by someone called Nadine Dorries, who is a British nurse. She's a Conservative member of Parliament, and she's now a junior health minister. I'll say no more. And here we are, ER, the emergency room, incredibly popular soap, which brought George Clooney to fame. But here, right in the centre, there's the doctor, the nurse. It did show a more modern kind of health work, which is about a team working together. And there's a bit more diversity appearing in the portrayals of people there. And as I said, my images were mainly drawn from the UK, but I have added in some other ones. I love this picture because it's a beautiful picture, but also because it's a picture of a nurse who was working in Mississippi during the first era of civil rights activism in the 1960s, and how dignified and what an amazing portrait of her. And of course, that's going to be part of our dialogue today about Black Lives Matter. And to add another person from more recent experience of mine, Ellie was a participant in the ICN leadership program 3 or 4 years ago. He was the most amazing guy. He was a nurse running a health center in a fairly remote area of Democratic Republic of Congo, and he told us the stories of how he and his fellow nurses, mainly, there weren't many doctors to be seen in that difficult area, were dealing not only with Ebola, but also with endless guerrilla attacks from various groups. And at one point, he and his colleagues in their health center, they went to see their neighbors in a different town. All the nurses in that health center had been murdered, and they buried them all. And eventually he died too. And I think it's just a reminder, of the reality of the incredibly difficult conditions in which nurses, actually give their lives and their health to work for families and communities and patients. So a sad reminder there. So my overall pitch about all this is that you might say, well, it doesn't matter how people are portrayed on the telly because we know that's not reality. But I think it does seep through into the way that people actually think about nurses, and maybe the way that nurses think about themselves. So a lot of the images I've shown you are the stereotypical nurse, and particularly in the UK, someone who's female, who's white, who's not that clever, who's nice, but not that well educated and submissive. And maybe this is, to some extent, a global nursing stereotype, which I think does come through in various studies and in my conversations. This, of course, is out of date, but we find it hard to shake off the blessings of being angels. Throughout this COVID epidemic, we hear ourselves described all the time as heroes and angels, and yet we're not even given the basic equipment to do our work safely, and we're not given safe staffing levels. So it's like, what does it mean, this being an angel? Do we wait for our treasure in heaven rather than here on earth? And I'm more interested in who we really are. And I became interested in that very early on. I wrote my book, The Politics of Nursing, in 1985 because I was pretty dissatisfied with what I found in nursing. And it was really a call to action, written with my colleagues in the Radical Nurses group. It was UK focused. But I look back on it, and I'm pleased to say that I did raise the issues of gender, of race, of sexuality, of class, social class, about how difficult it was in nursing with all these different backgrounds that people have, and how it seemed to very often hold people back. And I asked myself, what's changed in the 35 years since I wrote that book? I just want to raise briefly, as a way of trying to understand all this, this now rather well-known term called intersectionality. And I would recommend you to look at this fabulous TED talk by a woman called Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a African American civil rights lawyer, and she is astonishing and wonderful. And so she really brought this term into this kind of meaning, because our identities, all of us, are multiple, whether it's our gender, our race, our religion, our sexual orientation, our social group, our physical ability. And of course, these things interact. So we're not just one thing, and also we're not just one thing all the time. But the thing is that when these interact, it can often be very dysfunctional in terms of our place in the world, as well as our sense of ourselves. So I think it's a very relevant concept, very relevant theoretical framework to nursing, because it helps us understand how the aspects of our social and political identities combine to create unique modes of, I think in nursing's case, discrimination and lack of privilege. So it identifies the advantages and disadvantages felt and experienced by people. So I think in nursing, we talk, sometimes the focus is on gender now. So we say, 90% of nurses are women, and that's where all the issues come from. But then we think about the issues of, the different ethnic groups that work in all our health services. There's nowhere that doesn't have an amazing and rich and lovely diversity. But what that means, if you are in what's perceived as a minority within your country, how that might make it more difficult for you to get promotion, or to have your views listened to, or to be seen as an effective contributor when it gets to being at the top tables. So I would say all that image is getting, I think it's tired. I think it may have had its use at one time, and people did use it, like Florence, very knowingly as a kind of campaigning stance. But I think we have to up our game, and I think we have to move beyond it. I think we need to drop what's been called the virtue script about being good girls and boys. I think we have to be maybe a bit more challenging and even naughty. We certainly need to win friends and influence people outside nursing, because if we just say all these things to ourselves all the time, it just becomes an echo chamber rather than a force for change. We need to become activists, however you define that. When I look back, I think I started being an activist myself at school when I wrote a very trenchant feminist editorial for the school magazine, which amazingly was printed. So I realize now that our all-female teachers probably secretly agreed, although our school was very traditional. And through that time, I think, I've realized that whatever activism you choose, it's all about power, because without power, what can we do? It's all about politics. In nursing, we're often told politics is, not the right thing, but I would say, if that's a problem for people, then talk about it as policy. But really, these things are all very much interlinked. I think we do have to play the game, and it's always a difficult one, because if you don't play the game, then you're often marginalized. But the trick is that while you're playing the game, you also need to remake the rules. I think we can do a lot more. We've done better on this in recent years, a lot more in, as I said, not just talking to each other. Networking's great, but let's network across the board. Let's transform ourselves into social movements and link with social movements. Let's take control of that image and start telling new stories of nursing. So I love this reworking of Florence Nightingale's image by a wonderful guy called Alban Lowe, who's the artist in residence at Kingston University, UK. So I think this Warhol treatment of Florence in all her different lovely colours and guises would have appealed to her, perhaps shocked her a bit, but I think she would have liked it. What can we do is my final thinking points that I hope we'll pick up on in discussion. I think we need to tell our new stories, and we need to tell them in a new language. Get away from all that angels, heroes, virtue, good girls stuff. We need to use the fantastic resources we have within ourselves, within our nursing community. We've got the most amazing range of skills and attributes and personalities. Let's really use it. Be sure that we have the evidence clear and keep coming back with it. We need to be much more willing, and we're moving in the right direction on this, to work with, alongside, supporting our patients, our families and our communities, because they are our best advocates. And we need to keep on and on raising the issues. I know it gets tiresome. How many more times do we have to talk about safe staffing? But you have to be persistent and use the broken record technique. We need to take some risks. This is not a game for the faint-hearted. And I'm sure all of us on the panel will remember all the knockbacks that we've had throughout our nursing careers. Like me, when I was writing my nursing column in Nursing Mirror, talking about what I thought were the realities of nursing, I was frog marched over to the director of nursing office during my shift. They came to sort of march me off the ward, and she said, "You can't write those columns anymore." And I said, "Why not?" And she said, "Because they've got the hospital's name on them." And I said, "Well, I'm writing about what I see." So she said, "Well, at least I want to see them before you publish them." And I said, "Not likely." And then she carried on being a bit threatening. And I said, "Well, in that case, I'd like to have my union representative here." And then she backed off. And then later she claimed me as a wonderful student. So there you are. But there, the importance is I had the solidarity of my professional organisation behind me. Taking risks is not something to do on your own and unsupported. So that's just one little story. I'm sure we all think of examples of where we've had to be bold. We need to carry on with our work on creating positive practice environments. And remember that often you can feel it's all too overwhelming and we're too alone, but each one of us makes a difference. And if we link up with all the people, the many, many thousands of us around the world with like minds and like beliefs, then we can make a big difference together. So here's my traditional picture, which I had commissioned for my Politics of Nursing book all those years ago. It felt to me like we were angels, but labeled as angels, but actually we were running around all the time, harassed, trying to meet all those needs, patients' needs, doctors' demands, carrying this load about all, oh, you're so dedicated, your compassion, your duty, and let's have something a bit more different. So when I was at Nursing Times, I commissioned this cover because it seemed to me nurses are the sleeping, perhaps not very often asleep, but we're like the giant of the health service that's bound down when more than 70% of the health workforce worldwide, most of us women, and we're constrained by all these forces represented by these little figures, whether they're doctors or politicians or finance people. But actually, if we just realize we have the power and we can just break our bonds and go free and be much more powerful and influential. So that's where I'd like to finish. And I'll just turn off my...
Thank you, Jane, so much. That's wonderful scene setting. Thank you so much. Wonderful images of nursing from the past that really both amuse and disturb at the same time. So I want us to move now with you, Ying, to have a look at where we are at this precise moment, particularly in the UK with the COVID-19 epidemic. Have we been politically savvy as nurses? Could we do better? Could we have done better? As we seek to build back better, what should we be doing in learning from this pandemic? So thank you, Ying, for joining us.
Okay, thank you so much for having me, and it's my pleasure to join you this morning. And I was very struck by some of those angelic images that Jane shared, and indeed for me, there is the challenge of fighting off the negativity that purports for who we are as leaders and clinicians across the sphere. Now, I'll be dependent on Barbara to let me know whether my screen has been shared.
I think it's just coming, Ying.
Okay.
I can see somebody's screen, and I think it's probably yours.
Okay, it's got
happy screen sharing. Is that you?
Yes, it should be a red PowerPoint presentation.
I can only see happy screen sharing at the moment.
Okay, so let me go back.
No, I think I saw it behind there. Can you see it, Nick?
I can. I think possibly Jane needs to stop sharing her screen. It's the slide icon.
Okay.
There we go. So Ying, you should be okay to click that now
Sorry
and share
about
yours.
that.
All right. Can you see mine?
No.
Not yet. It'll be coming now, I think.
Yes, it does take a little while.
Hi, Sarah. Glad you got on.
Yeah, sorry, technical issues this morning.
There have been a lot of them.
All right.
Is it coming up, Ying?
Yes, I'm. Can you see it now?
You need to click the share screen, Ying.
Yeah. Yes, I have.
Okay.
Is it there now?
It's not, no.
Okay. Let's.
Did you get a second screen up?
Sometimes it's a bit of a delay. Yeah, in it. So yes, I can see the second screen, and I'm pressing on it now. My entire screen. All right. I'm not sure. Apologies, everybody. I'm not sure what's happening here. Let me just cancel it and start again.
Ying, shall we move on to Sarah and come back to you? Would that be better?
Yes, it might be. Looking to, yes. So to save a bit of time.
Okay. So Sarah is, so I should just say that I haven't been introducing people because we haven't got a lot of time, but everybody's bio and photos are up on the web. So if you want to know more about our speakers, please, please, please do go and check out their bios. But Sarah's joining us from Canada, and Sarah is on our board as one of our young nurse board members, our 2 young nurse board members. And has been doing many, many interesting things over the last, over the duration of the Nursing Now campaign, and undoubtedly before that. And Sarah, this year you became more involved in politics, didn't you? I think directly involved. So I'd love to hear your perspective from an early career nurse about nursing and politics. Do things look different from where you are? How are young nurses looking at this?
It's interesting for sure. In regards to the political setting and how involved nurses are, I think that you're getting a huge stance of nurses being more politically active surrounding the conditions of COVID-19 and being strong advocates for policy shifts within our health systems. So I would say the dynamic of the system has slightly altered, but we're still not to the extent that I would say we would want to be at. We lack the ability and opportunities to kind of sit at the top tier. There is very limited opportunities surrounding how nurses are engaged. It's very bureaucratic. So the experiences I have been quite interesting. I previously ran for a parliamentary position within our federal elections, and that was really sought out based off my interest within health policy and my previous advocacy work and work municipally. So it was unique in terms of the experience building and the skills that you took away from that. But unfortunately, within the nursing realm, not a lot of us have those experiences. So I find that that's always interesting because you're quite limited in terms of who these advocates are based off of their previous skill set, based off of their previous experiences. Usually these are very seasoned individuals. They've been in nursing for a while. They've done higher degrees of education. They've had a number of previous opportunities. They might not just be specific nurses who have been trained in nursing per se, but rather policymakers and lawmakers, and have gone on to do more of a career within that political realm. And I think that that's the interesting dynamic that exists, especially from my experiences and what I've been seeing personally. Being somebody who's really novice within my career, really early within my career, and been practicing for under 3 years, it's not the norm to have somebody like me enter within this realm, for sure. And it's interesting because then you're you're met with a number of challenges in terms of people looking at you based off of experience and age. I know as an early career professional, I've had a number of people really come forward and indicate that I don't necessarily have the experiences to support my advocacy ideas or initiatives that I'm putting forward. I lack the educational experiences in some realms, because these are individuals who have had multiple master's degrees, multiple PhDs. So you're looking at that level of competitiveness that's kind of embedded within that political system, as well as people having years and years of experiences within the world of politics. And then you're coming in as somebody who's done nursing from a clinical standpoint, done advocacy on the side, built experiences as another side initiative, and it's all out of interest that you kind of picked up. Which leads me to another point. Our nursing schools aren't necessarily built to support nurses going into policy and going into politics. It's not a skill that's usually taught at the undergrad level unless you are definitively interested in that route. And even at that, it makes it a little bit challenging, especially within your early career, to go forward within that realm, because a lot of times you're looking at a nurse being trained to practice within the clinical setting, to practice within their scope that they've been taught within the 3-4 years that they've been taught it. And it's all great and it's all amazing, because then you're coming out, you're in your early 20s, you're really excited, you're really energized, but there's always a couple of people who won't necessarily fit into that. And I found it personally difficult because I don't necessarily fit into that. I'm one of those individuals who has sought clinical experience throughout my career, but at the same time, I've never limited myself to it. So it's been unique because I've had a lot of pushback within my clinical realm, within my realm of colleagues that I surround myself with, and it's fun to have those discussions, because it really gets into it in terms of how these individuals view nursing and how nurses view nurses. And it's unique because we're not necessarily well versed with the idea and the notion that nurses can be different types of nurses outside of the four walls of a building, outside of the four walls of a clinic, outside the four walls of a hospital. We can be policymakers, we can be strong advocates, we can be members of parliament, we can be individuals who are very much embedded within the world of politics, but it's not something that comes forward, especially from a youth perspective, especially from an early careers perspective. And I think a lot of that's to do with the fact that we don't necessarily have a lot of opportunities within those realms, because we haven't been within those realms previously to the degree that we might be looking at right now, that we might be encouraging at this present moment. And that being said, our systems aren't necessarily built to support that. So I think different things that we can take away from that is looking at nurses being taught to be politically savvy, nurses being taught about politics, how to do an elevator pitch. I know that I've encountered a number of younger nurses, and they've always been very, very interested in learning how to speak and learning how to be articulate enough to present to policymakers or present to individuals who do have influence. And it's just simple things like being taught how to say your point within 2 minutes. A lot of that's negated and neglected within the realm of clinical nursing, within the realm of classic nurse training. And it's something that we need to look at, because we're looking at interdisciplinary skills being brought into the world of nursing. And that's very much the reason that I know personally I didn't pursue a master's degree within nursing. I pursued an interdisciplinary degree for that exact reason, that the skills didn't meet what I was looking for. And it's unfortunate, because I've essentially left a certain portion of my career, a certain portion of my colleagues, and said, okay, no, I'm going to opt to do a different type of learning experience, because you know what, at the end of the day, I know that the skills that I want and the skills that I'm going to need won't necessarily be found within the realm of nursing education at this present time, because it just isn't priority right now. And that's something that we need to do as educators, as academics, as individuals within the nursing system, is really advocate and really implement change. So I think that's something that we have control over as nurses, is being part of this whole change initiative for younger individuals, being part of this whole change initiative for early career professionals, creating opportunity. Once we create these opportunities and we build these skills, we can advocate for additional opportunities, because we'll have nurses that fit this credential criteria and are able to go forward within their careers. So just a couple of things that I've kind of noticed from my standpoint and my perspectives. It's not necessarily a geographical location issue. I've noticed it across the globe. I've had young nurses reach out to me from different parts of literally everywhere, and they've all indicated the same thing, where there's a lack of early career opportunities. There's a lack of early career experience building. They're very much encouraged to be on the ground, patient-centered, patient-focused, and that's amazing. But at the same time, you're getting a lot of young energy that's very much interested in different avenues of nursing. And it should be facilitated and encouraged within that early career phase, because you're getting these very passionate individuals who I've noticed within 5 years of their career of working in a hospital, they're no longer passionate about the same passions because it hasn't been fed, it hasn't been fostered. So it's a lot of potential that could have been there 5 years ago, but isn't presently there, and it needs to be nurtured. And it's something that I think the world of nursing can very much improve on, is supporting our younger individuals to get into these roles and advocating for these roles and creating these skills early on so that we're able to enter into this realm and these worlds well prepared.
Thank you, Sarah. That's a great note, really, isn't it, to for us to take away from this, that young nurses need both the preparation to help them be politically savvy, that it's a good thing to be when you're a young nurse, but we have to harness that enthusiasm as well, and think about ways of doing that. Thank you so much, Sarah. We really appreciate it. There's a few comments in the chat box that have come in while you've been talking, Sarah. Sedalia says what Sarah says is completely true. It happened to her. She finds most of the time the doctors are actually easier to work with and much more willing to help compared with nurses. And unfortunately, that saying that nurses eat their young didn't come from nowhere. And I think, Sedalia mentions mentors, and that's something that came into my head as well. Having mentors who've been around the block a couple of times can actually be very helpful for young nurses in looking at the opportunities and the challenges. Ying, how's it going?
Yeah. So let's have another try and see.
Let's get on.
All right. Lovely to hear from you, Sarah. That was really quite inspirational. Okay, so another try at sharing. Can you see my screen?
Not yet. It might take a minute. You've got to press two things, I think, haven't you?
Yes, yeah. So I've pressed share.
Okay.
And then plus as well, share my entire screen, which I've done, and then another share, but it's frozen on the second share. I sent it in to Hannah this morning, so I don't know whether Nick can access it, and then I can just speak through it as. But I'll get started in the absence of my presentation being able to come up for the sake of time. I'm not.
If you wouldn't mind, that would be great. I'm so sorry.
No. I'm not sure why it's not working. It happened during my run through. Fine. Okay, so really lovely to join you, everybody. And indeed, for me this morning, this time has been an incredibly challenging time for all of us. And indeed, especially for us within the nursing community. And the word, I think, which is on everybody's lips has been the word unprecedented. We've been in unprecedented times. And I think that has been very much so for us. I was very struck by Jane's presentation, where she talked about the intersectionality that is now being far greater recognized across our society. And for me, this is significant in terms of when we are linking some of the challenges that we have seen as a result of COVID in terms of the wider determinants of health and how they have impacted on health and care. So for us, the idea of politics in nursing is, or even nursing and politics, could seem as an outsider, to an outsider, to be an unusual concept. But I think for those of us with an interest in history, we know that nursing has always been political. And indeed, Jane alluded to that and presented that in her presentation. And the image that I had up in my presentation was one of nurses very early on, wearing the types of gowns that Florence would have worn, long to the ground, who were actually carrying placards along the streets of London, clearly wanting to get their messages across in a very vociferous way. But I suspect they would have been terribly polite. And I think for us, it is that nurses can be political, and dare I say, in picking up on some of what Jane said, they could even be radical. So, as you know, nurses are one of the few professions that is everywhere. It's in every community. It's at all levels of society. Nurses are there. And it's really lovely to have our international family on this call as well. So we see society at its best and also at its most vulnerable. And because of this, nurses have always stood up for the communities that they serve. People often ask me, why are there so many social justice issues that arise at our annual Royal College of Nursing Congress? And I believe, and this Congress is a meeting where all of our members have an opportunity to come together and debate issues. And I believe there is a simple answer, possibly one a bit more complex, but I think the simple answer could be because nurses do not want to stand by and see issues that affect their patients arising and not seek out ways in which they can address them. So indeed, what nurses are seeking to do is to speak truth to power and ensuring that power hears and understands the experiences from a nurse's perspective. So the question that was posed for me was, as Barbara said, have nurses been politically savvy? And I think another way of putting this could be, in terms of reframing it, is us asking ourselves, why are more nurses not engaging with the political arena? That is a question that we need to be asking ourselves. Is it this image of being angels? Is it this image of being polite? I know on a personal level from my own very typically British boarding school experience, where if you spoke out against those in positions of power or of leadership, you are being impolite and discrediting the profession. And I believe the time is right for us to move away, throw off that cloak of the past and move into the new authority that actually has been presented to us with COVID. So whilst I speak from a British perspective, I think this is reflected across the world. Nurses stand up for their patients every day in every situation that they encounter. I believe it is our second nature. We could improve, but we lobby, we are advocates, and there's a bit of politicking that takes place as well for us. And I think the important thing is significantly that as nurses, we are able to build meaningful relationships. And it is these meaningful relationships that enable us to be politically savvy on behalf of our profession, but also on behalf of those that we serve. So the first step, you may think, could be around conversations with our neighbours, our colleagues, and with our communities. And indeed, this time of COVID has presented significant opportunities for nurses with their neighbours that they may never have spoken to articulate clearly what it means to be a nurse and to throw off some of this old imagery that Jane so very clearly described earlier. So this will apply to many countries. We all have politicians and parliaments that we can actually approach in terms of bringing to their attention what it is that we do. All politicians in the UK have a surgery. The best approach that a nurse can take is using the opportunity to see a politician face to face in their surgery to raise the issues from their perspective. It's very difficult to turn away a face-to-face encounter, unlike what the response you may get from an email or a text to a politician. So in preparing this session, I had an interesting conversation with Barbara, and it was that physicians were saying they could not have done what they've done without us. And so suddenly there is this realization that indeed that nurses are of value. And for me, that is just such an important thing to be coming across, but actually long overdue. We have always been of value. It's just that we haven't been particularly good at articulating what we bring. And so, for me, it is that as nurses, we have had training which has enabled us to have intelligence, to be compassionate, to bring an intellectual capacity of wisdom to the situations that we're in. And it is this that we need to draw on. We know that nurses are the most trusted profession. This is a platform that we need to build on. So the power dynamic is always there with politicians, but if we are able to speak our truth of our experience to them, it's a very strong, powerful message. You would have seen, if you're in the UK and possibly elsewhere, the image of on our network of our chief exec of the Royal College of Nursing, demonstrating and modeling very powerfully what it means to be a nurse leader at this time, and speaking up and challenging politicians about the lack of PPE that there has been, speaking about the lack of support that there has been for nurses, the lack of nurses' names even being acknowledged when their deaths have been announced. And we've seen the headline news: inadequate PPE, nurse so-and-so dies from COVID, community nurse dies, nurses placed at risk. And for us as a college, we've been very saddened to see our nursing family being treated so horrendously. And so for us, it's very celebratory what our chief exec has modeled. And I think many could learn from that in terms of the opportunities that she has grasped in getting the messages about nursing out there. And if you could see it, you would have seen an image that I put up, which is about some mountains. And what I had done was really wanting to build on a quote by Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela says that in his book, The Long Walk to Freedom, I have discovered a secret that once you have climbed a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. And I was very struck by the reminder of this, because only recently, our president, who you will hear shortly, and other presidents of our royal colleges in England wrote an open letter to the government, really challenging them about their need to be planning for the second phase, because it was so poor, the experience that we had of the first phase. They need to be looking at what needs to be put in place now for that. And finally, within our headquarters at the Royal College of Nursing, there are some stained glass windows. And there's 3 stained glass windows, and they have the imagery of faith, hope, and fortitude. For me, faith, believing we will and can make a difference as nurses. Hope is always the fact that we can make a better future. And finally, fortitude, a very old-fashioned word that's not often used now, but it's about courage and bravery. And I think the momentum that has been built around the recognition of the role that nurses play and can play and do play has to be built on by all at this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ying. You know, we could have done with 2 hours for this session, couldn't we, really? I don't know how on earth we thought we'd get through it in 1 hour. Ying, that was great. Thank you so much for pulling us into, you know, what's been happening recently. And and how important it's been to have a presence during this COVID-19, and actually how difficult it's been to have a presence. There's a lot of interesting comments in the chat box, and I urge everybody who's on the call to take a look at it. We're not going to be able to get to questions in this session, though we can go over a little bit now. But I think one of the things that came up was, it's important to have a chief nurse, and Jane had responded to that. And Jane raises the point, which I think is also true in what everybody's been saying so far, is that it's all, having the position is one thing, enabling the position is another. So you have to have a budget, you have to be prepared, you have to be able to speak. And Jeremiah Maynard from Kenya, who did a webinar with us last week, I think, was saying, you have to, if you get to the table, you have to be able to be one of the diners. And I always recall in one of her articles, Jane says you're either you're either there to eat, or you're on the menu if you're in nursing. I think that's often true. We have to be at the table, but we have to be able to, as Ying was saying, we have to be able to be articulate and speak. Speaking of which, Anne-Marie, I want to bring you in. Anne-Marie is the president of the Royal College of Nursing, Anne-Marie Rafferty, professor at King's. And we're so delighted to have you. And I'm going to ask you to close this session. You've got about 9 minutes, Anne-Marie.
Well, thank you very much, Barbara. And it's a real pleasure and privilege to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And I've just relished listening to what everyone's been saying. It's music to my ears, and the way that we have migrated around these issues in time and in space. And a number of commentators, all of them, in fact, Jane's, first of all, Ying and Sarah have mentioned the kind of gravitational pull of history. Now, that can either be an anchor that holds you back, or it can actually be a point of critique that propels you forward. And certainly, as a historian, I've got a lot of my political education from reading history and trying on occasion to learn some of its lessons. I'm not sure how successfully, but anyway, I have definitely had a go. I'm also very struck by what Sarah was saying. I love the phrase of the young energy and the way in which, there's a word, Sarah, praxis, which you've probably heard. Maybe because I couldn't actually hear all of your presentation very acutely. It was very soft for acoustic reasons. But this idea of praxis is, I suppose, what Jane was referring to as well in this intersectional space here. It brings both theory and practice in a kind of creative tension and mix. And it's basically about fusing them both in this kind of DNA spindle. And so it's inviting us to think about, the theory of all of what Jane and you have been talking about, as well as Ying. This, even if we take positive practice environments and the need to build those, yes, it's got a theoretical and evidential base to it, which I've also had the privilege of working on with my fantastic colleagues from Linda Aiken and a whole team of people across Europe, and now another team added to that from Europe in a new intervention study. But looking at how these two things work together, the politics of the workplace is inescapably intertwined with what we're doing. So the fact is that they're not separated out. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that they are so enmeshed and dovetailed with each other that just even trying to think about how could we separate them is, an intellectual gymnastic kind of exercise. And I think it would suggest that the way that we need to tackle this is by trying to almost listen to our hearts, actually, when we are in practice, because our practice is a tremendous political teacher to us, and everyone here has talked about the politics of their own experience as well. And Ying has alluded to that in her comments on COVID and how the spotlight has very much been on nursing throughout this period in a way perhaps it hasn't before, even at the highest political level in the UK, with our Prime Minister having been taken to hospital and paying tribute to the nurses who was looking after him. And I think COVID could be a tipping point and a point of transformation for us. I think we need to use the crisis as an opportunity to reset policy itself. And as Barbara's already alluded, to build back better and start to put the building blocks of what a radical but sustainable nursing strategy actually might be. And, you know, this year of the nurse, Nursing Now, State of the World's Nursing Report, you know, we have ample evidence of the challenges, the deficits that we're facing. I mean, it's staggering to think that almost a quarter of our workforce is missing in action, isn't there. 6 million nurses short. I mean, there are huge inequities across the globe between the North and the South and higher and lower and middle income countries within that, not to mention anything of all the unintended consequences of migration and what COVID will do to our capacity to recruit nurses as we have rich from poorer countries. You know, that's going to really have to change in a very, I think, a really quite extreme way. How we look after our workforce well-being, that's one of the great pluses of the present, that actually that's a number one priority. And we have to ensure that the support, because goodness knows, and I've had the privilege of being involved in research projects, surveying and analysing the mental health challenges of nurses themselves. We in for a tsunami of mental health burden, not just from the population and all the anxieties and sources of distress that our communities are facing, be those our next door neighbours, as Ying was alluding to, but also through our own workforce itself. And I think in changing the narrative, something that Barbara's written about, and I think that's really also very clearly inked into Jane's remarks, in changing the narrative and new stories moving forward, we have to be the authors of those stories ourselves. And I mean, as a historian, just as a little aside, I'm always intrigued. You know, I've studied, you know, the history of nursing and colonial nursing, and trying to find nurses writing about nursing and diaries. And, you know, there are some materials, but by goodness, you know, nothing in comparison with other authors. And Jane studied English literature. She'll be only too well aware of the powering of nurses' pens in the past to leave a tangible record of what they were doing. So I think with all of the, you know, the internet, the IT, the other tools that we have at our disposal, we need to be recording, we need to be telling, we need to be creating new stories. And I think what we've also seen through COVID is a kind of a sort of explosion of creativity from nurses themselves through different modes of storytelling. Now, that's really great qualitative evidence that we need to feed into our lobbying efforts to complement. And there's nothing more compelling for the conversation with the MP in their surgery than actually telling stories. And I think nurses are natural storytellers. Maybe one of the challenges is nurses have no idea how brilliant actually they and we are at storytelling. And, you know, that, I think the appreciative inquiry, that coaxing that from nurses and workshops and trying to enable and empower the sharing of those stories as a collective community, and from that building a social movement, as we've just heard, is most definitely the way forward. I think I've probably just about taken up my time. Thank you.
Anne-Marie, thank you so much. Your comments again have sparked some interesting interactions in the chat box as we've been going. But that's a wonderful way to bring us to a close, isn't it? To think about appreciative inquiry and how we actually get the information that we need to show the value of nursing. And, you know, that's one of the things Ying and I were talking about, is so many people have been saying, you know, without nurses, this wouldn't have happened, it couldn't be done. But the trick now is to move beyond the adulation to the enabling factors that give nurses a voice. So we really are getting towards the end. I think we ought to find a way of all of us on this panel perhaps trying to come together to put something together that we could maybe publish on this. I'm going to ask you in 2 or 3 words or less to say one thing that you think that everyone can do who's on this webinar to become more politically effective as a nurse. Ying, you first.
Okay, so my first point is to become more politically effective as a nurse is find a local leader of influence that you can go and speak to tell them about what you do as a nurse.
Great advice. Sarah?
Build your voice, enhance your skills, look at interdisciplinary skills, and seek opportunities.
Oh, you packed a lot into those words. Jane?
I think mine is something like take a deep breath, speak up and speak out.
Whoa. Anne-Marie?
Mine is about reaching out to friends and allies. It's the building friends and influencing people, and thinking about how we can join forces in coalition building for social justice that includes a nursing agenda, but is not solely about a nursing agenda.
Fantastic. Well, you heard it here first, folks. Mine would be find yourself a mentor that you consider to be politically savvy and go and ask them to work with you to help you become more politically savvy. And that can be just about anybody. It doesn't have to be a nurse, but somebody you consider is politically very good. So I want to thank all of our panel, and I want to thank Nick, who's been troubleshooting behind the scenes here. Thank you, Nick. And we hope that you will continue to be engaged with us at Nursing Now. We really do want to change the story. We're really happy to have your comments and ideas and ways of engaging with you. And we will definitely think about having another go at getting these messages across in another format. Thank you all so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.